started recording the second part of this right away, but I had a couple of things I needed to do, finalize the first video, and while that was going on, picked up my guitar, finished those beers, opened another one, a Yingling Oktoberfest, and every rose has its thorn, every cowboy. Man, what were the rest of those lyrics? I'm still pretty sober, so we'll continue exactly where I left off before, and that would be with my brother and I. We rushed down to Carolina Beach, which, now that I think about it, it was probably a little bit of a miracle even getting there, because the car I was driving at the time was, I didn't know it when I left or anything, but hit the road, and I don't know, an hour in, I had to stop for gas or something, and the transmission was kind of stalling, getting stuck between gears or something. I think it was either getting stuck in first or second gear, and I honestly thought, crap, this thing's gonna break down on me or something, on the road, on the way to, being with my Nana and the rest of the family as, she was passing away. And I remember, shout out to my boys, Perry and Justin, because, they called me on the road, halfway there. We were scheduled to get together and hang out, get dinner or whatever, and filled them in, and they were just they're my dudes. They were big encouragement and everything. And got to Wilmington, and anybody who hasn't been to Wilmington, when you get there from I-40, it hits not really a main street, but it's just this straight drag of stoplight after stoplight. It was every stoplight I hit was a red light, and once it, just sitting there and turns green, it was getting stuck in first or second gear, and it was just basically praying the whole time, just get me there to Carolina Beach, which is 20 some minutes south of Wilmington, Cape Fear area. And it's kind of a straight shot, at least for me. Once you hit I-40, it's more or less stay straight pretty much the whole way. But it was just getting there was kind of a headache in that regard. But got there, and it was, like early afternoon on a Friday, and I hadn't really slept at all. So I just like got there. There was not anything going on, and I just was like, well, not really knowing anything. I just crashed for 6-7 hours, woke up, had dinner with my family. My Nana's younger brother drove down. He's like a truck driver, so he got the news, drove down, hung out with us, because Nana was in quarantine, so like nobody could really do anything. You couldn't just like walk into the hospital and sit in a waiting room or anything like that. It was COVID protocols and all that bullshit. So just like sat at the house just waiting, to hear anything. Saturday morning, early afternoon came, and I guess like part of the protocol was get on like Skype or whatever, and like hospital nurses would do like a once a day like Skype sessions with her. And like I remember my brother was antsy or something that morning. Like he's a cyclist, so he was just like, well, shit, nothing's going on, so I'm gonna go do a bike ride. Like, no problem with that at all. If I could have been at the gym or something at that exact hour, I would have done the same thing, straight up. But it was one of those things that like maybe we heckled enough that whoever the nurse was on duty got on Skype that like exact moment and put Nana on, and she was like being ventilated or whatever at that point. But I mean, she was awake and alert enough, but it was just like that moment sitting on the fucking computer, iPad, whatever it was, and she didn't realize what was going on, and I guess couldn't make out like the computer screen right in front of her, and she hears our voices and all, but like can't understand like why we're not there. She at that point had already been there for nearly 2 weeks. And it was just like we knew right then and there that like this was getting close to the end, and we were given a choice, more or less, like over the next day or so. She was, because of congestive heart failure, they were fighting off, fluid buildup and all, so they were, I can't remember the name of the medication, but it's, I can't even remember the exact word I'm looking for. I guess diuretic. Whatever like the medication was that they were given to her was supposed to alleviate all the fluids in hopes that, she would get better. And by like Sunday morning, they had given her so much of this stuff that, the doctor pretty much told us, things get a little blurry, but maybe this was more like what we were told Saturday afternoon, if I believe my memory serves correctly. That the doctor, if I remember, the doctor said right after, we had this brief conversation with her on Skype, the doctor came on and was basically saying, look, you can give her more of this medicine, this diuretic or whatever, and either it's, she's right on the threshold of what the human body can handle with this, and either she gets a little better, her body handles it, or she doesn't, and the medicine just takes her down real quick enough that, like, from where you're at, you're not going to be able to get here in time. It's like a 50-50 sort of thing. Either it works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, then she's going to die really quickly and nobody's going to be here with her. So your only real choice, because of the whole COVID protocol bullshit, is continue to fight or call end of life and we'll let two of you in. And, that was like Saturday afternoon, and it was pretty clear to all of us that, the time had come. And like Saturday evening, it was weekend for me and everything, but, I'm supposed to be back at work Sunday night, to start my personal Monday. And in working security and all, and especially like during the pandemic, it was just so much bullshit going on with work that I've had to learn over the years that I don't have a lot of people I can rely on to pick up the weight if I can't. So I've had to learn to just carry my weight regardless. I'm talking like a handful of times where I'm, like mental health days is not a thing. Sick days are not a thing. Dealing with like real personal crisis, well, you better fucking man up. I've had to do it numerous times. And so like the thought of calling out just didn't seem like something I could do. And so I was considering like heading back early, like Sunday morning or something for work, and I told my family, and my aunt fucking chewed me out like then and there for that, and I'm glad she did, because she was fucking right, like it sucks to be put in that position, but like she was right. And like Saturday evening I was just really torn on like what to do exactly, but I made the right decision and decided to stay. And my aunt was right. Sunday, like sitting there just hanging out at the house, and we get the call from the hospital that it was time. Like I said, if this was literally 2 weeks later, it was basically signed into law here in North Carolina that in like death situations, people couldn't be denied their family, But since this was before the shit went into effect, it was a limit of two people in the room with the patient. It was just, that's how it was. And in normal circumstances, like my mom and my aunt would be the two people, but they decided that they would send me and my brother instead. And I remember my aunt saying that they had dealt with this sort of thing before, and that it was our turn, to carry this burden. So, got in my car, we drove up the highway to Wilmington, stopped for caffeine and sugar and cigarettes along the way. It's just like all I could think, for myself at least, was, I gotta have something to lean on. Walked into the hospital and went to the front desk. They sent us up. And it's weird thinking about, like, it's not like there was all this security or anything like that keeping people out. It's not quite like an honor system or anything like that, but if anybody just wanted to walk in, even if only for a minute, to be, lightly kicked out by a nurse, like that could have happened. We could have all just like walked up in that bitch and just done it, I guess. I mean, sure, like, oh, you've got to have a fucking wristband on, and, if you aren't showing this wristband, then somebody might stop and talk to you or whatever, but it's like, in a situation like that, if, like, it would take minutes for security to, like, show up anywhere to do anything, so it's just like, hindsight of just like walk in there and not take shit from anybody and not let anybody stop you and just walk straight in there, and if security shows up and wants to kick you out at that point, then walk out of there politely or whatever, but we didn't know any better, and so like we're trying to abide by the rules or whatever. So it's just my brother and I, and we sat in the room with her. Like, I had my little gator whatever mask thing on, and then another like surgical masks and like the face plate, and I was like practically being triple masked at that point, because like they tested her either Saturday night or early Sunday morning, and like she was still positive for COVID. Like at this point, it had been 3 weeks. Like, I know things were bad for her and all, but I still had a really hard time believing any of that shit. That she had been sick with COVID for 3 weeks at that point. Like, yeah, I know long-term COVID. Like, I've had friends that have, suffered, but like, positive with COVID for 3 straight weeks, just, I have a hard time believing that. Anyway, like, they started giving her morphine and weaning her off the ventilator and everything, and it took a few hours, and the whole time like if you read the lyrics of the song, it all makes sense, and like I'm literally talking in the literal story, Lady Elm, the protagonist, Black Knight, but really like what I'm talking about there is literally what happened with us and my Nana. That we just for like 3 hours just repeating the same things over and over again about how much her family loves her, and that it's okay to let go. And like the whole time sitting there, I thought, like, why us? Like, there's other people who should be here instead of us. And I'm not even just talking about like my mom and my aunt, but like maybe other people. Yeah, I remember they sent in a chaplain, and at one point, like halfway through the whole thing, and we stopped and like chatted with the chaplain for a few minutes, and you know, me having like degree from ORU and everything, like just chatting about like theology stuff, like theology programs, whatever, and like it was really good, and the chaplain, you know, prayed for us a little bit, and you know, basically said that we were taking it well, and how like well adjusted we were and all. But you know, I can only speak for myself, but maybe it's the same for my brother. That like when you're in the middle of a crisis, like you just have to gird yourself and just deal with it in that moment. But it's like that time afterward when the levity and the weight of everything just sets in. So then you're just kind of left with this like post-traumatic whatever. But like in those 3 or 4 hours, however long it ended up being, like I remember sitting there and like, because it's like double masked and then like the visor in front of me, like everything was just like in a fog. Shit was just kept fogging up, and it was hard to see. But I mean, like, it was so uncomfortable dealing with that stuff and like wanting to like pull everything down, and I think like the last 30 or 45 minutes or so were just sort of like both my brother and I were like, fuck this, and you know, kind of pulled the mask down a little, kept the visor on, but it was just so incredibly uncomfortable dealing with and unable to see. But I do remember sitting there despite that and like wanting to remember every single detail and color and everything that I saw. But when I try to think back now, I don't remember a lot, like color-wise. You know, there was like one nurse, and she had a mask and all on, but like I don't really remember much of anything of her like features or anything. There's only like 2 things that I remember in particular noticing in those like 3 hours, like visually speaking, that being like, despite how I guess my Nana was supposed to be filled with fluids and all, like when they like uncovered the blankets from her feet, like they didn't look swollen or anything like that, and then her hands looked so thin and frail, but like the skin was leathered, but like hanging, not really hanging, like it was melting or something, but it was leathered and like she needed some moisturizer or something. Like, I don't know, it just it looked really strange to me how thin and frail her hands were and leathered, and I knew she was old, and I noticed her hands before, like a month and a half before her passing, spending the week with her, but it looked different, and I don't know how to explain it. I remember that, and I remember how her mouth hung open, and she had a number of teeth missing from like her heart attack years and years before. But that isn't to say like she didn't have any teeth at all, but it was like the way her mouth was hung open, it would make you think like she didn't have any teeth. It was just dark, like there was barely anything left in there. I remember that. And most of the time with her, just the desperation that she would understand what we were telling her, but like she wasn't conscious. But for maybe a couple of moments that I'm positive of, because and I talk about all this in the song, and do it in the song as Lady Elm, but she came to for a couple of minutes, and my brother and I were telling her, we loved her, and how much everybody loved her, and wanted to be there and everything. And she just looked at us, and like her last words, there was no sound, there wasn't even like a whisper or whatever, she just mouthed, "I love you," and ended up momentarily after that, losing consciousness again, while they're just slowly giving her more morphine to make her comfortable, and letting it take its course by taking her off of oxygen and everything until she's basically dying. And the nurse turned to my brother and I, and we're just asked us, for favorite or fondest memories of my Nana, tell her that, try to recall whatever memories we can take, and we were pretty calm and everything, and just, at least for me, it was like almost like an awe towards like the process of this death itself. And then it was over. She was dead, flatlined and everything, and the nurse did whatever she was doing, said like, take all the time you need, and I'll be outside, give you your privacy. Her belongings are like in a cubby, like in the corner, and make sure to grab the little baggie of that stuff. And as she walked out, it was just my brother and I in my Nana's body. And this might be morbid, but like I turned in and took a picture with my phone, and for like the artwork that was that picture was like the basis for what I did. And even like when I was doing some of the vocals for this song, I put that picture on like in front of me on my phone, and it's not something that I want to look at very often. I don't. Tried to take in the surroundings, but it's all a blur to me. And I called like my supervisor at work and was like he knew what was going on, and also like things were cool, but before that I was like, well, maybe like my job could be in jeopardy, by deciding to stay here. And it wasn't that case at all. Like everybody that I work with was sympathetic and understood like the levity and all. But like, making that call Sunday afternoon, like in the middle of all this, like at that moment didn't know or anything if it would end up like biting me in the ass with my job. So I'm thankful that worked out, obviously. But like I've said, there's been other times in the past where like that literally wasn't an option. Like dealing with crisis and being like, I can't come in tonight, and well, we don't have anybody to cover for you, so like if you don't come in, that was a real thing before. But like with like being up in the hospital and like the first hour and a half, like talking to her, and then I stepped out to give my supervisor a heads up that I wasn't going to be in that night. Like at that moment, like I didn't care. Like if I lost my job, fuck them, sort of thing. Because like this is more important. But we left and drove back to her home, and I remember like walking out of the hospital, and it wasn't like the sunniest day ever, but it wasn't like completely overcast or anything. It was like it was a nice day outside, but it felt dead outside. And walking through the hospital and outside, it's like we took off all this shit, the like drapery and the masks and everything, and there wasn't like paperwork or anything. It was just like, okay, like go on sort of thing. Like we just went on, and like seeing other people, it was like another day for them. But walking outside the hospital was like, felt like the end of the world or something. And fast forward to like 3 weeks later, and we had the funeral, and one of the lines in the song that I wrote in there was, mentioning that, the tribe was absent, and, where are her sons and daughters, which assumes that Lady Elm has children and grandchildren somewhere. And what that actually means for me was like at the funeral, I had a couple of buddies, like shout out to my like dude and dudette, Jason and Liz, because they came out to the funeral and like it'd been the first time in a long time, I think since the pandemic started, that like we had seen each other in person, and like we talked a lot after the funeral and everything, and I don't think they ever had like met my Nana or anything, but like they were there for me and my brother, and like that meant a lot, still does. And there was distant relatives that I haven't seen in God knows how long, that I didn't get a chance to like catch up with or anything like that at the funeral, but I had some family that like growing up together, like one in particular, I might as well not like completely beat around the bush or anything like that. I had a first cousin that growing up together, we were like literal brothers. Like, we did so much shit together, and there was, I wouldn't say like a complete falling out years and years ago, like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, however long it's been, but probably 10 or 11 years. But he left the area, started his life over, and we lost contact for a number of years, and then reconnected, and I could have, I wanted to be like completely bitter against him back then, because it just, the way he handled things, I still don't agree with, but like it was a get out of jail free sort of thing. Like when we reconnected, it was like, I'm not going to bring this shit up. Like I just want to be at peace with somebody who who was like, wasn't like, he was a brother to me growing up. And then he couldn't even show up with his family to the funeral. And then like his sister too. And I'm saying this knowing that like his like stepmom or whatever could be potentially watching this right now, being a friend on Facebook or whatever. I don't care. I don't care who it pisses off. Like, that's fucked up. That you can't even show up to your grandmother's funeral is like if and when I ever run into him again, like, I'm not gonna like beat his ass or anything like that. I'm way past that point. Like, I'm not gonna cuss him out or anything like that, but there would be a confrontation, like just simply saying like you couldn't even show up, like I'm not perfect. I'm not the greatest human being, but like that it's the least you could have done, you know, to be honorable to your family. You couldn't even do that. Like, why should I give a fuck about you? Like, go live your life in peace, yeah, but like, stay the fuck over there. Like, don't, like, that's kind of how I feel. Like, I don't want to cause war. I don't want to stab or kill the guy or anything like that. Like, it's nothing like that. I don't wish any ill against him whatsoever, but like, couldn't even show up to your grandmother's funeral. Like what kind of person is that? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. So for this song, the Black Knight here specifically signifies my brother, because he's the one person who like really understands like the whole thing. We haven't talked about it like too much, and this is the first time I've talked about this really publicly. But I remember telling my brother a while back, like after everything happened, like one thing that I always kind of assumed and always hoped would happen is that I would find a wife, you know, but like I always kind of like assumed that she would meet my grandmother and that my Nana would be there at the wedding and stuff like that. And then after she died, the realization, and I think if I remember correctly, I've even thought about this while I was like driving down there, that would never happen. That I could find the love of my life, but she would never know the sound of my Nana's voice. Like, whenever you would talk to my Nana on the phone, she would sign off, she would always say bye. But it was the way she said bye that she would like, it was this weird idiosyncrasy where she would say it kind of, you know, the southern drawl and everything, but it was like where things phonetically, like the stress was just in a weird space where it was like in the middle of the word, but like her vocal intonation would go up and then come back down, like in the middle, and so it was like bye. Like that was something like, that was like her calling card sort of thing, and like nobody's ever gonna know that. Like thinking about that I could get married tomorrow and whoever that could be would never know the sound of that. Just like this stuff you never think about when you're a kid or whatever, but you know, that becomes the reality now. And like returning home like a day or two later after she passed away, returning to like church that following Sunday, like a week later and all, it was like nobody knew. Like I didn't say anything, I didn't make a big deal out of it. Like just, it was like business as usual sort of thing, but it was like everything had changed. And even talking to my brother about it, like in the last year or so, like kind of bringing it up, it's like, I'm not the same person. Like after the funeral, after the death, everything, like the world just seemed more like set in stone, more dark, just darker. Not to say like felt completely nihilistic or anything like that. It's just like something changed and it's never going to be the same. And just feel less hopeful about the future. And learn to just deal with it and just not really keep your head down or anything, but you just learn to carry that burden without showing anybody else. But it's like, especially with Christianity and church and everything like that, it's like, I heard a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote a couple of days ago. Essentially, he said something like, most men live their lives in quiet desperation, something like that. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is this quiet desperation where it's, you want to see things better and you want to see a move of God, or it's like comfort. But and so many times at church, like I see people just kind of like the same way walking out of the hospitals. It feels like it's the end of the world, but you look at other people, it's just another day to them. It's just like they seem happy, and you're just standing there like completely heartbroken. And instead of, screaming or trying to inflict pain on others or whatever, you just stand there, keep walking, whatever, in quiet desperation is the best way I can describe it. The references that I use in this song, the title "Rising of the Lights" is this like archaic term that vulgar people used. It was like used to describe a tightening sensation in the chest, difficulty breathing and coughing and stuff like that. In bills of like mortality back in like the 17th century, rising of the lights was fairly common. And lights in this case refers to the lungs themselves. According to my research, Sir William Vaughan, who he promoted colonization in Newfoundland, suggested like a different treatment back in 1630, and explained that the best cure was made by soaking lungs of a fox in vinegar, then drying them out in an oven, then taking the product in like liquor form. Apparently he quoted of saying, "Of all creatures, the fox hath the longest breath and the strongest wind." So it made sense that like eating or drinking like a liquid form of a fox's lungs would improve lung capacity and cure like lung-related diseases. But, you know, the rising of the lights was like characterized with like a hoarse cough, difficulty breathing, choking sensations, like croup, asthma, pneumonia, emphysema were like culprits of rising of the lights. And so that's where the title comes from. I reference plague and war as horsemen, you know, reference to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There's references in the song to sacraments and last rites. And I wanted to do that because like COVID practices, protocols, like literally denied people like my Nana of these things. I reference in the song the experiencing self versus the remembering nostalgic self of youth, which is like a concept I heard about from a person named, their last name is Kahneman, that there's like 2 versions of everybody, that there's like the version of them that is like experiencing something in present versus like past tense remembering. I reference extreme unction in the lyrics, which is, you know, the Catholic sacrament administered to those, you know, in sickness or old age, that it's like, okay, so it deals with the idea that those like near to person who is potentially dying, you know, they like this extreme unction, you know, prays for their recovery or whatever, but also like that ties in with Pentecostal ideals, you know, let's say of like praying for somebody to be healed. I mean, it's extreme unction, you know, prays for somebody's healing, but I mean, this is a Catholic practice. So like the practice itself involves being anointed with oil on the forehead or other parts of the body, while, you know, a priest will recite a prayer of comfort, peace, forgiveness of sins, and stuff like that. So that ties in with it. Um, there's a reference to a cenotaph, that, like, in the song the prison becomes this, but its definition is that it's an empty tomb or monument to honor someone whose remains are elsewhere. That, like, in the literal meaning of the song, the prison itself kind of serves as a cenotaph to Lady Elm, but I mean, maybe in a more abstract sense, that, like, loneliness and that, like, quiet desperation now kind of serves as an empty tomb. It's this weight is carried and all. I don't know what else to say or to add with this, so I'll just try to quickly end it. Yeah, I haven't been the same, and it's hard because, yeah, I miss my Nana and all, but, like, I know she's better off. I know she's free from pain, and, she was a ripe old age, but just the way the whole process went down because of COVID, and recognizing that, like, she's one of the statistics, that, like, I mean, COVID didn't help. COVID was like the nail in the coffin, so to speak, but, like in my family, we all know, like, she died because of heart failure, because, like, her body was just overtaxed, but, it's not like we saw, like, the death certificate, I guess, or whatever, the hospital came up with, but, like, we recognize that, like, she was probably, written down as dying of COVID. Because, what was it, like, every COVID death at that time was, like, a guaranteed, what, $25,000 to a hospital? I mean, can you blame a hospital for doing that? I mean, yeah, it's wrong if that is the case, if you believe that, which I do. I have no problem saying that. But if you don't believe that that was what was happening at the time, that's fine. I'm just saying, like, if just writing on a piece of paper, like, COVID-related death means that you're going to get $20-some thousand, like, is what it is. It was one of those things then and even now that, like, you want to be bitter against that, but, like, what's the fucking point? Like, you just feel powerless. You want to revolt, but you feel powerless because really at the end of the day, all that matters is that you love this person that means so much to you, and you want to make sure that they know that they're loved. And then they're gone, and it's like, cares about the money, who cares about any of that stuff, because you can't replace the person. I said at the very beginning of this volume, like, these series of videos that, there could be like some sort of prophetic warning or something in all this. I've thought about it for a number of years now, especially since the pandemic. Just seeing a lot of people come and go, like at my local church. I've never said anything about this and probably not going to, so if anybody sees this, is what it is. You see these people week after week in your church, in your city, since so much of this album is about this city and this prison and all this stuff. It's kind of an allegory of sorts, I suppose. I don't know if this is some sort of prophecy or whatever, some sort of warning. If there's schism ahead or anything. But if I was going to say anything about this as some sort of warning, is I know, like, human behavior, human nature, like, people are going to come and go. There's people who deserve to be cut off, so to speak. Not even so to speak, I mean literally, like, cut off. Don't speak to them or whatever, their behavior's messed up, all that kind of stuff. But I think in the last 3 or 4 years, I've just noticed it happen much more frequently and over just petty shit. I know everybody's dealing with their own struggles and battles, their own post-apocalypses. I know everybody breaks. But if I was to encourage anybody with anything and saying any of this stuff, like, don't give up on people. Like, yes, you have to keep up boundaries and protect yourself from abuses and stuff like that, but like, don't give up on people and institutions because it's the easy thing to do over petty nonsense. Because I think there's been so much of that the last few years, and seeing just faces come and go, and it's like when you're face to face with death like that, that petty shit just doesn't matter anymore. somebody hears this and takes that as some sort of encouragement, you know. But I've gone on way too long. So that's the gist of Volume 5, and I hope you've enjoyed this time. There will be a Volume 6 eventually, but it's probably going to be a while. Definitely going to take time with it. And until then, cheers.